Jason Miller unlocked the front door, slipped off his shoes, and headed to the kitchen. He just dropped his wife, Emma, at the airport for one of her biweekly, 3-day business trips. Emma worked as a legal secretary for Nathan Pierce III, a man Jason mockingly called Trey. Emma often reminded him, "Jason, Nathan can't stand you." Though he never admitted it, Jason enjoyed using the nickname because he found Nathan insincere. A quick glance at his watch showed it was only 7:30 a.m., plenty of time for another cup of coffee and to check his email before heading to the store. Jason wasn't a fan of computers, but he used email to stay connected with friends from trade school, where he studied diesel mechanics. Now in his 30s, he was one of 3 lead mechanics at a heavy equipment firm. Despite his title, he preferred working hands-on alongside his team. While his job occasionally required overtime and travel, it was nothing compared to Emma's frequent trips. She'd been with Crosby and Pierce for 6 months, having moved from a real estate clerk to a higher-paying legal secretary after advanced training. Jason and Emma met in college over 8 years ago and had been married for 6. They bought their house after saving diligently while starting their careers, Jason at the equipment firm and Emma at a local real estate office. Finishing his coffee, Jason went to the spare bedroom to use the computer, hoping Emma had left it on. He smiled at the screensaver. A vacation photo from Cancun, both of them tan and grinning on a sun-soaked beach. He'd wanted a more private photo as the screensaver, but Emma had vetoed that idea. Clicking the mouse, the screensaver vanished, revealing an open email from Emma's work account. Curious, Jason's eyes caught on one word, underwear. Puzzled, he leaned in. Assuming their glitchy modem had acted up again, he reached to reset it, but before he could, the email's contents stopped him cold. "Emma, I hope I catch you before you leave. I really want you to bring that black bra I gave you on our last trip, the one with the teal accents. You didn't get a chance to wear it for me. My first meeting with the governor isn't until 2 p.m., so we might have time for you to wear it, and I can take it off for you this morning. Nathan." Jason reread the message, hoping, praying, he'd misunderstood. But the meaning was painfully clear. Emma was having an affair with her boss. His mind went blank, his mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. Staggering to his feet, he shoved his chair back hard enough to slam into the wall. His thoughts raced to that morning. He'd seen that same black bra in Emma's drawer as she packed. Now it was gone. Desperate to believe it was a misunderstanding, he rifled through her drawers. Nothing. He remembered her saying she'd snagged it on sale at Victoria's Secret, but she'd never worn it for him. Jason sat heavily on the edge of the bed, trying to process. Emma had always been affectionate. Their marriage felt solid, no signs of infidelity. He couldn't believe she'd cheat. Driven by a need for answers, Jason returned to the computer. After rebooting the modem, he accessed her email, scrolling until he found a folder labeled personal. Inside, it was filled with messages from Trey. He clicked the first one, reading it twice. His face went pale. Without thinking, he printed the email and called in sick to work. There was no way he could focus. For the next hour, he read message after message, forwarding copies to his personal account and printing them. By the time he was done, tears blurred his vision. The truth was undeniable. His marriage was over. After double-checking Emma's work emails and finding nothing new, Jason logged out of her account, switched to his own, and created a folder for the forwarded messages. He changed his password to secure them, shut down the computer, and carried the printed emails and his now cold coffee back to the kitchen. Grabbing a beer from the fridge, he sat at the table, rereading the messages in disbelief. The emails painted a vivid picture of Emma's affair with Trey, especially during their business trips to the state capital. She'd only been at her new job for a week when she was required to accompany Trey on her first trip. At the time, it seemed legitimate. Crosby and Pierce often lobbied the governor's office. But now, Jason realized Trey had likely targeted her from the start, arranging unnecessary trips under the guise of business. Eventually, Emma began volunteering for these trips. Jason suspected Trey had seduced her during the second one, if not the first. The earliest email in her personal folder was from Trey, thanking her for an amazing dinner and a Gucci purse, hinting at a night they'd spent together. Jason vividly remembered Emma showing him that purse, claiming it was a $40 knockoff from a mall kiosk. The ease with which she lied made his stomach churn. The correspondence between them was frequent, especially around their trips. They always booked 2 hotel rooms, but Emma would sneak into Trey's after Jason's nightly check-in call. Their private jokes about his predictable routines cut deep. The diamond earrings Emma wore to their Christmas party, ones she claimed were cubic zirconia, were actually a gift from Trey. One message even contained a thank you note from Trey, hinting that Emma had given him an extravagant gift beyond professional boundaries. Another email mentioned Trey's condominium downtown, triggering Jason's memory. Emma had casually mentioned her boss's place overlooking the river park. Jason now realized it was likely they'd met there, sneaking around under the pretense of work lunches or midday meetings. By noon, Jason had read every message, each one chipping away at his heart. He knew he had to figure out what to do next, before Emma came home, and before Trey came with her. Emma usually flew home early Friday mornings, taking a cab and calling Jason at work to let him know she'd arrived safely. Ironically, the real danger had already crept into their marriage while she was away. Jason grabbed 2 more beers and collapsed onto the couch, realizing nearly 5 hours had passed since he'd dropped her at the airport to meet her lover. It hit him how calculated it all seemed. Trey was rarely around when Jason saw Emma off, and on the few occasions he was, he'd sit in the departure lounge, deliberately ignoring them. By 6 p.m., Jason was barely coherent, having made countless trips between the kitchen and the bathroom. When he opened the fridge again and found it empty, he noticed the 12 beer bottles scattered across the table. He'd finished both 6-packs he'd bought the day before. Starving and exhausted, he stumbled to bed, collapsing fully clothed. At 10:15 p.m., the phone jolted him awake, dragging him from a haze of bittersweet memories with Emma. He knew it was her, likely wondering why he hadn't called her at the Hyatt Inn like he always did. The answering machine picked up just as he reached for the phone. "Hello? Is that you, Emma?" "Yes, it's me," she replied, her voice tinged with concern. "Why didn't you call? You always do. Is something wrong?" Jason clenched his jaw, fighting the urge to lash out. "I'm sorry, Emma. I fell asleep." "That's not like you," she pressed. "You've never done this before." "I had a couple of beers after work. Guess they knocked me out." Then, shifting the focus, he added, "So, how was your day? Busy morning? Hope Trey isn't working you too hard." Emma hesitated. "No, not really. Why do you ask?" "You never ask about my work trips." "Just curious," he replied, his voice steady despite the storm inside. "How's everything going? You doing okay?" "Of course. Why are you asking that?" she responded, her tone slightly uneasy. "Just kidding. I trust you completely," he lied. There was an awkward pause before she replied, "Of course you do. You've never said anything like that before." "Forget it. I'm probably just tired. The beer's catching up with me. I'll head to bed." "Okay, Jason. Get some rest. Love you." He couldn't say it back. "Good night, Emma." He hung up, then stared at the phone for a long moment before dialing the Hyatt Inn, asking for room 612. After a dozen rings, he hung up, unsurprised when no one answered. The thought of them laughing at his predictability made his chest ache. He stumbled back to bed, tears burning his eyes. The next morning, he didn't feel guilty about the drinking. A shower helped clear his head, and though he made it to work, he moved through the day like a robot. His coworkers noticed his distraction, but no one asked. After his shift, he picked up greasy takeout, something he rarely craved, and washed it down with 2 more beers. This time, he left the second 6-pack untouched, knowing he couldn't drown himself every night. At 8 p.m., Jason called room 612 at the Hyatt. No answer. He knew from Emma's emails she was usually in her room between 9:30 and 10 p.m. for their nightly calls. He kept trying, dialing every half hour. On the 4th attempt, at 9:45, she finally picked up on the second ring. "Hey, Jason. Perfect timing. I was just about to get under the covers, but waited for your call," she laughed. "I didn't sleep tonight, Emma. Just watching TV, waiting to call you," he replied, masking his suspicion. "How'd you spend your evening?" "Same here. Just watching TV. Took a long bath earlier," she said, sounding relaxed. That's good. You'll be well rested for tomorrow night. She giggled. Already making plans, huh? I can't wait. After a bit more small talk, Jason ended the call. I've got a couple of things to do before bed. See you tomorrow. Bye, sweetie. Love you. Jason hung up without responding. After waiting 15 minutes, he called again. No answer. He wasn't surprised. The next day at work, he couldn't focus and left after lunch to be home when Emma arrived. He knew they couldn't coexist under the same roof, not after everything he discovered. Back home by 1 p.m., he sat quietly, feeling hollow but determined to keep his dignity intact. As he reflected on their life together, all he could recall were the good times. The betrayal still felt surreal. He was at the kitchen sink when the front door opened, the sound of Emma's luggage wheels echoing down the hall. She appeared in the kitchen, surprised to see him. Jason? What are you doing here? Why aren't you at work? She asked, her surprise shifting to concern. I've been waiting for you, he replied, his voice flat, emotionless. Why? She asked, frowning. Instead of answering, he tossed a stapled stack of printed emails onto the table. Emma glanced at the papers, then at him. Her curiosity faded into shock as she skimmed the pages. Her face turned pale. When she finished, she dropped the papers back on the table, standing in silence. Well, you know, she finally muttered. Where did you get this? From your work email. The modem glitched, and your account was left open, Jason replied, his tone eerily calm. If it hadn't been for that, I probably never would have found out. You've been very good at hiding this. Emma said nothing more. She pulled out her phone, turned her back to Jason, and made a call. Jason knows. It doesn't matter how, she said flatly. After a brief pause, she added, Yes, I'll call a cab and meet you there. Bye. Turning slightly toward Jason, she muttered, I'm leaving. I'm sorry you found out this way. I'll be back tomorrow for the rest of my things. She grabbed her travel bag and headed for the door. Jason, stunned, shouted after her, That's it? No explanation? You're just sorry I found out? Emma paused, then turned with a cold shrug. What's there to explain? I've been with Nathan so much that being with him completely is just the next step. He's been good to me. You can't compete, Jason. I'm sorry. Tears welled up in Jason's eyes. Is this about the money? The purse, the earrings, all the other stuff? She hesitated. The gifts are part of it. Nathan lives an upscale life, and I'm ready for that. She disappeared into the bedroom. Jason stood frozen, trying to collect himself. 5 minutes later, she returned with a garment bag. A cab honked outside. Without another word, she left. Jason followed, standing on the porch as the driver loaded her bags. She got into the cab, glanced back briefly, her face unreadable. He thought she might have been crying. Alone in the kitchen, Jason whispered to himself, What the hell just happened? The next day, Saturday, Jason was still in shock. Around noon, Emma called, saying she'd be coming with her father to collect the rest of her things. When they arrived, Jason sat silently on the couch, watching as they carried boxes to the car. After a while, her father, Thomas Bennett, sat beside him. They shared an awkward silence until Jason finally asked, Did she tell you what's going on? Thomas sighed, looking uncomfortable. I'm sorry, Jason. She seems to have made up her mind. We don't understand why she'd leave you for her boss. Jason shook his head. I guess it's what he can give her. She never said she loves him, or that she stopped loving me. Thomas replied quietly, Does it really matter? Jason thought for a moment, then whispered, No. She's been with him for months. I couldn't forgive that, even if she wanted me to. They sat in silence until Emma reappeared, wiping tears from her eyes. I have everything I need. Do whatever you want with the rest. She carried a final box to the car, her father following. After they left, Jason wandered through the house, staring at the remnants of their life together. He gathered the clothes, makeup, and toiletries she'd left behind, dumping them in trash bags. He wanted every trace of her gone. The rest of the day blurred. He lay on the bed, replaying everything, torn between heartbreak and fantasies of revenge. But eventually, he realized that while he was angry, he wasn't vengeful. What he really wanted was to forget her, no matter how hard that would be. The weekend passed in a haze of beer and numbness. By Monday morning, he felt slightly better, more resigned than healed. On Tuesday, he called Crosby and Pierce to get a forwarding address for Emma's mail. The receptionist said Emma would email him the details. That evening, he received an email with her new address, an upscale ninth-floor apartment, undoubtedly Trey's. On Wednesday, Jason was called into his manager's office to take a phone call from his bank. They informed him that his mortgage payment had defaulted. After a tense discussion, he discovered both his and Emma's joint accounts had been drained, nearly $20,000 gone. Furious, he drove straight to Crosby and Pierce, storming past the receptionist to confront Emma. His voice echoed through the office as he accused her of stealing his money. Nathan Pierce III peeked out of his office but quickly retreated, locking the door behind him. Jason turned back to Emma, demanding answers. She calmly handed him an envelope. "You can have the car, the house, and the furniture," she said coldly. Security guards appeared, warning Jason to leave or face charges. He stormed out, shouting, "You're nothing but a greedy leech." His words lingered in the air as he slammed the door. In the parking lot, he opened the envelope. Inside was a spreadsheet detailing their assets and debts. According to her calculations, if he kept the house, car, and furniture while she took the cash, the split would be fair. But Jason knew better. Selling the house would come with hidden costs she hadn't accounted for. He went straight to the bank, securing a line of credit to cover the mortgage and immediate expenses. It was a temporary fix, but it gave him some breathing room. The reality hit hard. Rebuilding his finances would take months. The next 2 weeks were a blur of legal notices and emotional exhaustion. A letter arrived from Emma's attorney, threatening a restraining order if he contacted her or Trey again. Furious, he considered responding but ultimately decided it wasn't worth it. A week later, Emma officially filed for divorce, using the settlement terms outlined in the spreadsheet. After spending $200 and missing work to consult a lawyer, Jason was told fighting it would cost more than it was worth. Outside of legal battles, life slowly crept back to normal. 3 weeks after Emma left, Jason realized he needed to reclaim his space. He cleared out the last of her belongings, rearranged the bedroom, redecorated the bathroom, and tossed out every photo of her. The house felt emptier, but somehow lighter. One evening, flipping through old photo albums, he found a picture of himself with Laura Brooks, a high school friend. Curious, he searched for her name in the phone book but found nothing. He set it aside, unsure why it mattered. About 6 weeks after Emma's departure, Jason was half asleep in front of the TV when a knock at the door startled him. Jason was surprised when he opened the door to find Emma's older brother, Daniel Bennett. "Daniel," Jason greeted, stepping aside. "Didn't expect to see you. Come on in." Daniel patted Jason's shoulder as he entered. "What's up, Jason? I tried calling, but your number's not in service." "Switched to using just my cell to save money," Jason replied, leading him to the living room. "Want a beer?" "Sure," Daniel said. Jason returned with 2 bottles, handing one to Daniel. "So, what brings you here?" "I figured I wouldn't see you again after Emma left." Daniel shifted uncomfortably. "That's actually why I'm here. Emma visited Olivia a couple of days ago. I told her exactly what I thought about her cheating on you. Then she and Olivia went to the kitchen to talk. I listened from the garage." Jason leaned forward, intrigued. "What did she say?" "I've been trying to understand why she left. She admitted she left because she thought you'd never forgive her. She said while Nathan's gifts and lifestyle were nice, you were better in bed. She even planned to break up with him soon, if you hadn't caught her." Jason sighed, shaking his head. "Would've, could've, should've. Doesn't matter now." Daniel nodded. "She regrets it, but she's still pushing for the divorce. I heard her and Trey call you a starter husband. I think she saw you as a stepping stone." Jason clenched his jaw. "Isn't that charming?" "Don't get mad at Olivia about it," Daniel added. "I just thought you should know." They talked for another half hour before Daniel left. Jason eventually fell asleep, his mind haunted by the term starter husband. The next day, Jason stopped at a grocery store, determined to start eating healthier. At the checkout, the cashier gave him a curious look. "Aren't you Jason Miller?" "Hi, Grace. I didn't know you worked here," he replied, recognizing her as an old acquaintance. After paying, he asked, "You were friends with Laura Brooks, right? Any idea what happened to her? Or her mom?" Grace thought for a moment. "I heard she got married years ago. Her mom still lives in the same house, but she remarried. Her last name's Cooper now." "Thanks, Grace," Jason said, feeling oddly comforted. They agreed to meet for coffee sometime before saying goodbye. Back home, Jason cooked a healthy dinner and went for a jog, determined to embrace this new routine. Later, he found Laura's mother's number listed under Cooper. When he called, Margaret and Cooper provided Laura's number, mentioning that Laura was now a widow. Jason noted her address in a modest neighborhood, deciding he'd call soon. Over the next few days, Jason's new lifestyle improved his mood. He felt more positive at work, but a short letter from Emma disrupted his progress. "I never thought of you as a starter husband," she wrote, clearly influenced by Daniel's conversation. Jason replied simply, "Actions speak louder than words." She never responded. 3 months after Emma left, Jason received the final divorce papers. Surprised at how quickly Trey had expedited the process, he marked the occasion with a single beer. He sent Emma one last email. "You got what you wanted." No reply. That evening, Jason decided to call Laura Wilson. She was genuinely happy to hear from him, and they spent over an hour catching up. Laura shared that her husband, Mark, had been killed in Iraq, leaving her a widow with a 4-year-old daughter, Sophie. She was living on a survivor's pension, but planned to return to work as a therapist once Sophie started school. Jason shared the story of his divorce. As their conversation wound down, he asked, "Would you like to get together for dinner or drinks sometime?" Laura hesitated. "I'm not ready to date, Jason. I'm focused on Sophie right now." Though disappointed, Jason wished her well and hung up. Feeling the sting of rejection and the finality of his divorce, he grabbed another beer and went to bed, reflecting on the emotionally draining day. The next 2 months flew by. Jason settled into a routine, focusing on work and personal growth. Thoughts of Emma still crept in, but they grew less painful with time. To save money, he cut off his landline and canceled premium cable, relying on newspapers left in the lunchroom by coworkers. One morning, during a coffee break, a coworker handed him a newspaper with a bold headline, "One dead, one in critical condition." Jason's heart skipped as he read the article. It described a fatal accident involving Nathan Pierce III and Emma Miller. Nathan was dead. Emma was in critical condition. Alcohol was suspected. Jason read the article twice, then folded it and set it aside. "Can't say I'm sorry he's dead. I hope Emma recovers, but I'm not losing sleep over it." His coworker gave him a knowing look. "Seems like you've been through a lot with her." Jason nodded. "Reading that article just proved I'm ready to move on." And he was. The article marked a turning point. A weight lifted, and for the first time in months, he felt genuinely free. Over the next few days, more news trickled in. Nathan's blood alcohol content was over the legal limit. Emma remained in critical condition. Jason invited a coworker from the office over for dinner, enjoying the simple company and realizing he was ready to move forward. 2 weeks after the accident, Daniel Bennett showed up at Jason's door again. They sat at the kitchen table, beers in hand. "What brings you here?" Jason asked. "Just in the neighborhood," Daniel replied. After a pause, he added softly, "Sorry about Emma's accident." "How's she doing?" Daniel sighed. "Severe head injury. She's in a medically induced coma. It's been hard on our parents. Thank God she wore her seatbelt. Nathan didn't, and he paid for it." Jason took a long sip of his beer, then said, "Maybe you should sue Nathan's estate." Daniel gave a weary nod. "Dad and I have talked about it." They sat in silence, the unspoken weight of the past few months lingering in the air. "We'll see how she does once she's off the medications and out of the coma. If she comes out at all," Daniel said. Jason nodded, his face unreadable. "Tell your parents I said hello. I've moved on with my life. I even had my first date in years. I'm sorry she was hurt, but I'm not letting it affect me now." They shifted the conversation to sports and work, carefully avoiding any more talk of Emma. As Daniel got up to leave, he added, "Olivia and I are doing better. She saw the mess Emma got herself into and realized she's happy to be with me. Sometimes the grass seems greener, but it's not." Glad to hear that, Jason replied. Emma probably influenced Olivia. She forgot what it meant to be committed to a marriage. It could have been worse. We could have had kids. They shook hands, and Daniel left. The next 6 weeks passed quickly. Jason heard nothing about Emma and assumed she was recovering. He started dating regularly, going out about once a week. He even spent a few nights with Rachel, the receptionist from work, enjoying the ease of their connection. It helped him feel ready to move on. One Thursday evening, Jason returned from a jog to the sound of the doorbell. To his surprise, it was his former father-in-law. "Thomas," Jason greeted. "Come in. What brings you here?" "I can't stay," Thomas replied. "I'm on my way to the hospital. We'd like you to visit Emma with us tomorrow at 2 p.m. She just arrived this week." Jason frowned. "Why do you need me there? Our marriage has been over for a long time." Thomas gave a tired sigh. "We'd just like you to meet us there." "We'll talk then. I'm in a hurry. See you tomorrow." Jason watched him leave, puzzled. The next day, he rearranged his schedule, left work early, and snacked on fruit as he drove to the hospital. Arriving around 2:30 p.m., he felt a mix of nerves as he approached Emma's room. He hadn't seen her since their bitter office confrontation, and they hadn't exchanged emails in months. Emma was asleep when he entered. Her hair, once long, was now cropped short from surgery, revealing a scar along her scalp. For lines and heart monitors surrounded her, beeping softly in the sterile room. Jason sat quietly, unsure of how he felt. After a few minutes, Emma stirred, blinking until her eyes met his. A smile crept across her face. "Jason, you're here. Where have you been? I've missed you these past 3 days." Jason blinked, taken aback. "I've been home and at work." Her face twisted with confusion. "Why weren't you here when I woke up? Why would you go to work or stay home when I'm here?" Jason's patience snapped. "We're divorced, Emma. You left me for your lover. Why would I visit you? I'm only here because your parents asked me to come." Her reaction was instant. She shrieked, flailing her arms and trying to sit up, yanking at the 4 in her arm. "No, no, no. What are you saying?" she cried, panic etched into every word. Alarms blared as the 4 ripped free. 2 nurses rushed in. One glared at Jason. "What did you do to her?" "I didn't do anything," Jason replied, stepping back. "I was just standing here." Emma mumbled incoherently, her eyes wild, struggling against the nurses. One of them said, "I'll get the restraints and call the doctor for sedation," before disappearing down the hall. Jason shook his head, muttering, "I think she's lost her mind," and left the room. As he reached the elevator, Emma's parents arrived. Before he could say anything, screams echoed from down the hall. A nurse rushed past them with restraints and a syringe. Emma's mother turned to Jason, panic-stricken. "You didn't talk to her, did you?" Jason simply nodded. "Oh, God, no," she cried, dashing toward Emma's room. Bewildered, Jason pressed the elevator button. As the doors began to close, he caught a glimpse of Thomas scanning the hall for him. Jason gave a small, dismissive wave and left. Driving home, he reflected on the surreal encounter. "Whatever's going on with her, it's not my problem anymore," he muttered. After showering, he thought about reaching out to Laura Wilson again. If she wasn't available, he'd call Rachel. He nearly hung up as the phone rang, but to his surprise, Laura answered. "Hi, Laura. It's Jason Miller. I hope I'm not catching you at a bad time." "No, I'm glad you called. I tried reaching out, but your number wasn't working. I wanted to apologize if I was harsh last time. I only use my cell now." "No need to apologize. Actually, I was calling to see if you'd like to have dinner, tonight or tomorrow." Laura hesitated. "I have plans with my mom and stepdad tomorrow, and I couldn't find a babysitter for Sophie tonight." Jason smiled. "Why not bring Sophie along? I'd love to meet her." Laura laughed. "Have you ever taken a 4-year-old to dinner? It limits your restaurant choices. Let's pick a family-friendly place. I really want to see you." After a pause, Laura agreed. "There's a restaurant Sophie loves. Great dessert bar. Perfect. I'll pick you up at 5. Just tell me where." Laura sounded excited. "Are you sure about bringing Sophie?" "Absolutely. If she's anything like her mother, It'll be a pleasure. After hanging up, Jason felt lighter than he had in a long time. Later that night, lying in bed, he replayed the evening in his head with a smile. He remembered picking Laura up, stunned by how beautiful she looked. Her short, dark hair suited her, and she seemed taller, more confident. Sophie, a little version of Laura, had the same dark hair and bright eyes. Jason had been nervous about how Sophie would react to him, but those worries vanished when she grabbed his hand on the way into the restaurant. Dinner was filled with easy conversation, laughter, and plenty of interruptions from Sophie, who was endlessly curious. Afterward, Jason and Sophie built sundaes at the dessert bar, her giggles filling the space like music. He couldn't remember the last time he'd felt so content. The next morning, Jason joined Laura and Sophie for church, not for the sermon, but simply to spend more time with them. As they sat together, Jason realized he was finally, truly ready to move on. After a pleasant evening, Jason walked Laura and Sophie to their apartment. Sophie's need for her mother's attention prevented any chance of a good-night kiss, but Jason didn't mind. He was content just being with them. On Sunday, after church and brunch at IHOP, Laura dropped Jason off at his house. As he stepped out of the car, Sophie chirped, "Don't forget we're going to the zoo." "I won't forget," Jason promised with a smile. But his mood shifted when he noticed his former in-laws, Thomas and Nancy, standing at his door. Nancy's face was tense, her eyes puffy. "We need to talk. It's important," she said. Jason invited them in, brewing coffee as they settled into the living room. Once seated, Nancy took a shaky breath. "Emma's in a terrible state. Since your hospital visit, she's been hysterical whenever the sedation wears off." Jason frowned. "What does this have to do with me?" "We wanted you to meet with her neurologist first," Thomas added. "He can explain her condition." Jason, confused, replied, "I'm sorry, I didn't know, but I barely said anything to her." Nancy's voice trembled as she continued, "The problem is, you told her about the affair and the divorce. We were hoping to avoid that until she was stronger." Jason's brow furrowed. "Why wouldn't I mention it? She can't expect I'd forget. Just because Trey's gone doesn't mean I'd take her back." Thomas sighed. "Emma had a severe head injury. It damaged part of her temporal lobe, causing retrograde amnesia." "Amnesia?" Jason echoed. "But she recognized me. She knew both of you." "She hasn't lost all her memory," Thomas explained. "She's missing the last year and a half and parts of earlier years. She thinks you two just got back from Cancun. The doctors hope she'll regain more memories over time, but there's no guarantee." Jason sat back, processing this. "So, she doesn't remember the divorce or the affair?" "No," Nancy whispered. Jason rubbed his face, frustration simmering. "Look, lying to her isn't an option. She doesn't get a free pass because Trey's dead." "We're not asking you to lie," Thomas replied gently. "The doctor recommended giving her small pieces of the truth to help her process everything gradually. You overloaded her. It might have triggered some memories, but we don't know how much." Nancy regained her composure. "She's fragile. They've started new medication, and we'll have another discussion soon." Jason felt a pang of guilt. "I'm sorry if I made things worse. I didn't know." Thomas leaned forward. "We were hoping you could help her, trigger her memories. Photos, letters, anything that might connect the dots." Jason stared out the window. "I can't help with photos. I threw them out months ago." Nancy's face fell. "What do you mean?" "I mean they're gone. I deleted the digital ones I wanted to keep and tossed the rest. I even offered them to Emma before, but she wasn't interested." Thomas and Nancy exchanged a shocked glance. Jason stood. "But I have something else that might help." He returned with a stack of papers and a CD. "These are the letters I found, the ones that expose the affair. Maybe they'll jog her memory." Nancy reached for them, but Jason pulled them back slightly. "Careful. They're explicit in parts. Just be prepared." He added copies of the legal documents, including the warning letter from Crosby and Pierce. Lastly, he handed them a CD labeled Cancun. "These are the only photos I have left of us together. Maybe looking at them alone will help." Nancy carefully folded the papers and tucked the CD into her bag. They sat in silence for a moment before she whispered, "I don't think you'll want to talk to Emma again about all this." Jason shook his head. Not right now, but if she wants to talk, after she's faced the truth, you can call me. I might consider it. Thomas hesitated. Could you ever consider starting over with her? Jason didn't even pause. No. She chose Trey's wealth over me. A head injury doesn't change who she is inside. And even if it did, I'm not taking that chance. Thomas and Nancy nodded, understanding more than they let on. As they left, Laura and Sophie pulled up. Sophie jumped out of the car, beaming. We're going to the zoo to see the elephants, she announced excitedly. Thomas and Nancy managed warm smiles before driving away. Jason chuckled and turned to Laura. Sorry, I'm not ready yet. Come in while I change. Soon, the trio was off to the zoo, leaving the past where it belonged. Another month passed, and Jason found himself happier than ever. He saw Laura and Sophie regularly, their bond growing stronger with each visit. While Sophie's constant presence kept things innocent, Laura eventually suggested hiring a babysitter for their next date. Jason eagerly agreed. On date night, they watched a movie, then danced at a small bar while Laura's mom babysat Sophie. Back at Jason's house, they sipped wine and slow danced to his old CDs. The warmth between them grew, and after a few sweet kisses, Jason reached for his phone. Laura raised an eyebrow, smiling. What are you doing? Jason pressed a finger to her lips playfully. Give me a minute. I want to talk to your babysitter. Laura's laughter turned into mock outrage as she tried to grab the phone. Don't bother my mother. What are you? She stopped struggling when she heard Jason say, Everything's fine, Mrs. Cooper. I was hoping Laura could stay a little later. Oh, that sounds wonderful. He paused, grinning mischievously. I like the way you think, Marianne. I'll handle the sheets. Goodbye. Ending the call, Jason burst out laughing. Laura stared at him in disbelief before joining in, their laughter echoing through the house. It was the happiest Jason had been in a long, long time. Laura, still a little confused, asked, What was that about, Jason? Jason chuckled. I'll tell you. I think I'm really going to like your mom. She and I get along great. Laura raised an eyebrow. What did she say? Jason grinned. Well, your stepdad Edward's at your place with her. Sophie's fine. Fast asleep. And, your mom and Edward are doing the same thing we're doing here. Apparently, Edward had a doctor's appointment today and brought along some blue pills. Your mom insists you stay here tonight because they're using your bed and don't have pajamas. Laura's jaw dropped. My mom would never say that. What are you pulling? Jason laughed harder. They were enjoying your wine, and Edward got your mom a little tipsy. She thinks we're great together and wants you to stay. She even said to make sure we change the sheets in the morning. Blushing, Laura shook her head. I find it hard to believe my mom actually said that. Jason leaned in, kissing her softly. Don't forget, we're meeting them for brunch at IHOP tomorrow at 11. At 2 p.m. the next day, Jason lay on the couch, smiling as he replayed the wonderful evening with Laura. When they arrived at IHOP, Margaret and Edward and Sophie were already there. Both adults smiled warmly, and Sophie waved excitedly. Sorry we're late, Jason joked. I had to do some laundry, making Laura blush. During brunch, the table was filled with laughter and inside jokes about blue pills, sheets, and wine, much to Sophie's confusion. In the parking lot afterward, Jason kissed Laura and Sophie goodbye, then hugged Margaret Ann. Whispering, he said, Thanks for the push. It's what we needed. Margaret and chuckled softly. You two are good together. Edward and I, well, we tested his prescription too. They both laughed as she walked to the car with Edward. Jason waved as they drove off, still smiling when his phone rang. Expecting it to be Laura, he answered brightly, Hey. But it wasn't Laura. Hi, Jason, said a familiar voice. Jason's smile faded. Thomas? What's up? Emma wants to talk to you. She's staying with us and asked if you'd come over for coffee. She's afraid you'd hang up if she called. Jason hesitated. I guess I could. I've got no plans today. Should I come now? We'd appreciate it. Okay, Jason replied, his curiosity piqued. As he drove over, he wondered what Emma could possibly want after all this time. Walking into his former in-law's house felt strange. The walls were still the same, but the warmth he once felt was gone. Thomas and Nancy greeted him and led him to the kitchen. Emma's not here yet, Thomas said. But when she arrives, we'll give you two some privacy. Minutes later, Emma walked in. Jason was taken aback. She looked good, healthier than he'd expected. Her hair had grown back, styled neatly, though she seemed thinner, with dark circles under her eyes. She looked nervous, clutching a handkerchief in her hands. Jason broke the ice. You seem to be recovering well. Thanks, Jason. I appreciate you coming on such short notice. I hope it wasn't inconvenient. It's fine. How's your memory? Are you starting to remember things? She shook her head. Bits and pieces. The receptionist at Crosby and Pierce helped me recall some details, but it's frustrating. Jason nodded. Is there something you want to ask me? Emma offered a fragile smile. Yeah, I've got a few questions. Olivia filled in some gaps, but I still don't understand how I did the things I did. Jason stayed silent, not trusting himself to respond. Emma dabbed at her eyes. I'm truly sorry for how I treated you. If I hadn't seen the letters and talked to people, I wouldn't believe it myself. She paused, then added softly, I have vague memories of Nathan, but none of our time together. I don't know what I saw in him. I visited his apartment recently. If my clothes and stuff weren't there, I wouldn't believe I lived with him. After a moment, she asked quietly, how did you find out about the affair? I know it involved email, but I don't remember how. Jason sighed and explained how he'd stumbled upon the first message, which led to more discoveries. Emma pulled out the stack of letters he'd given her parents, her hands trembling as he detailed how the mention of lingerie had caught his attention. The lies about the purse, the earrings, all of it. She looked horrified. When he finished, the room fell into silence, save for the soft ticking of the kitchen clock. Emma wiped her eyes, her voice barely above a whisper. Forgive me for lying. I know it's easy to say, but I truly mean it. Jason stayed quiet, staring at his coffee cup, unwilling to say it was okay. Because it wasn't. A few minutes passed before Emma asked, can you tell me about the letter where Nathan and I joked about my chauffeur? Jason's jaw tightened. I wish you hadn't asked. But he told her anyway. How she and Nathan had laughed about him driving her to the airport, carrying her luggage, including the lingerie meant for someone else. How they'd made jokes about his predictable calls every night around 9:45, using them to cover their tracks. Emma's face crumpled. She sobbed, her apologies tumbling out between breaths. I'm so sorry, Jason. I can't believe I did that to you. Jason took a long sip of coffee, his voice calm but distant. It's all in the past now, Emma. I still get upset sometimes, but I've moved on. They shifted the conversation to her health. Emma explained she was dealing with occasional seizures, and the doctors were still adjusting her medications. Emotionally, she couldn't handle the stress of work, so she'd resigned from Crosby and Pierce. As Jason left the house, he felt lighter. Not because Emma's apology had healed old wounds, but because he knew for certain he'd closed that chapter for good. When he got home, his phone buzzed again. This time, it was Laura. Hey, she said warmly. Sophie wants to know if you're still up for the zoo this weekend. Jason smiled. Wouldn't miss it for the world. And for the first time in a long while, he knew he meant it. Emma's parents mentioned they were consulting an attorney to sue both the insurance company and Nathan's estate for damages related to her injuries. After about 15 minutes of awkward small talk, Jason glanced at his watch. Well, I should get going, he said, standing up. Emma's voice shot out quickly, as if afraid he'd leave before she got the words out. Do you think we could go on a date? I know you'll probably never forgive me, the new Emma who betrayed you, but I'm the old Emma again. I don't remember cheating on you. Maybe if we went out to dinner, you could fall in love with me again. The old me. Jason paused, choosing his words carefully. I'm sorry, Emma. To me, there's no old or new Emma. There's just the one I loved and the one I lost to Trey. It took a long time, but I've moved on. Emma's eyes filled with tears as he spoke. She nodded slightly, her lips trembling. As Jason reached the door, she whispered, Did you find someone else? He hesitated, unsure how honest he should be. Finally, he said softly, I think so, Emma. I think I have. Emma wiped her eyes. Is it the dark-haired woman with the little girl? Jason blinked, surprised. Yes, that's her. How did you know? My parents mentioned seeing her at your house, she replied, her voice fragile. After a pause, she added quietly, you deserve someone who'll treat you better than I did. Before he could respond, she stood abruptly and fled the room. Jason didn't wait around. He was gone long before Emma's parents realized he'd left. A month later, on a bright, breezy Saturday afternoon in April, Jason and Edward unloaded a rented truck, helping Laura and Sophie move into Jason's house. Their relationship had grown stronger, and they decided to take the next step, to see if living together felt as natural as everything else had. Sophie was overjoyed to have a yard to play in and her very own big girl room. Jason's old computer had been moved to a corner of the living room, and the spare room was freshly painted, decorated with colorful butterflies and rainbows. In the garage sat a large box containing an unassembled playset and swing set, Jason's weekend project. They settled into a comfortable routine. Every Sunday, the three of them attended church together. Jason noticed that Emma's parents rarely showed up anymore, but he didn't give it much thought. For months after Laura moved in, their minister made an unexpected announcement. Next Saturday, we'll be celebrating the wedding of two beloved members of our congregation. Jason and Laura are tying the knot, and everyone is welcome to attend. They decided on a small, informal ceremony at the church instead of City Hall. Sophie was thrilled to be her mother's flower girl and even more excited to have a new dad. Jason knelt beside her one evening and gently said, Mark Wilson will always be your father, sweetheart. But I'd be honored to be your father too. They agreed Sophie would keep her father's last name, even if Jason eventually adopted her legally. Mark made the ultimate sacrifice, Jason said. That shouldn't mean losing his only child. Before the wedding, Jason and Laura spent an hour on the phone with Mark's parents. They explained their plans to marry, reassured them about Sophie's role in their lives, and promised to visit for a week every summer. The Jansons were overjoyed, and Jason couldn't wait to meet them. They decided that first visit would double as their honeymoon. The wedding was simple but beautiful. Friends and family gathered at the church, the ceremony filled with laughter, heartfelt vows, and happy tears. Some guests exchanged knowing smiles. Laura's pregnancy was becoming noticeable, but it was Sophie who made sure everyone knew the details. I'm having twin brothers, she announced proudly, her voice echoing through the church. Jason wasn't sure what Sophie was more excited about, the arrival of her brothers or officially having him as her dad. A week later, Jason was under his car, changing the exhaust system in preparation for their trip to visit the Jansons, when he heard a familiar voice. Jason? Sliding out from under the car, he squinted up at Daniel Bennett. Daniel, Jason said, standing up and wiping his hands. Didn't expect to see you. They exchanged a quick handshake. Daniel glanced at the car. Getting ready for a trip? Yeah, we're heading to meet Laura's in-laws. Daniel nodded, then hesitated. I thought you should know. Emma came to your wedding. Jason froze. She what? Yeah, Olivia and I brought her. She wanted to see you, I guess. We stayed until the ceremony ended, but it was harder on her than she thought it'd be. Jason shook his head, struggling to understand. Why would she even want to be there? Daniel shrugged. I think she needed closure. Seeing you marry Laura probably helped her accept that it's really over. She's trying to get over you the way you got over her. Jason exhaled, not sure how to respond. After a moment, he said, I hope she finds peace. Daniel nodded. I think she will. They parted ways, and as Jason watched Daniel leave, he realized something surprising. He genuinely meant what he'd said. He hoped Emma would find peace. Because he already had. She thought watching you get married would help her move on, Daniel said. It bothered her more than she expected, but she was glad she went. They chatted for a while longer until Daniel added, Oh, I almost forgot. Emma's claim against Nathan Pierce's insurance company has been settled. Since it looks like she won't be able to work again, she received almost $1 million. Part of the deal included getting his apartment, so that's where she lives now. Jason raised an eyebrow. Why would she want to live there? We're not sure. She said she hopes it'll help her regain lost memories. Personally, I doubt it. The doctors believe she's recovered all she's going to. Honestly, being surrounded by reminders of that guy, I don't think it's good for her mental health, especially considering he's gone. You've moved on, but she only remembers the good times with you. I think it's a mistake. 2 years passed quickly for Jason and Laura. Their twin boys, Mark and Jason Jr., were soon joined by a baby sister, whom they named Marianne in honor of Laura's mother. Their cozy house started feeling cramped, and discussions began. Should they build an addition or buy a larger home? They figured they had another year to decide. One quiet Friday evening, the phone rang. Laura answered, her expression shifting to concern before she handed the phone to Jason. "It's Thomas Bennett," she said softly. Jason took the phone, surprised to hear Thomas's voice. "I wanted to call you personally," Thomas began, "so you wouldn't find out from the paper tomorrow. Emma, she's gone. Daniel found her today. She must have passed sometime yesterday." The news hit Jason like a cold wave. He felt the air leave his lungs, his mind flooded with fragments of memories, some painful, some bittersweet. Laura's warm hand slipped into his, grounding him in the present, reminding him of the life they'd built together. Taking a steady breath, Jason said quietly, "I'm sorry to hear that, Thomas. My condolences to you, Nancy, and Daniel." "Thank you," Thomas replied, his voice heavy. She took her own life. Left a note for my mother and me. It's mostly personal, but she wanted us to tell you that she never stopped loving you. She tried to move on, but she couldn't let go of the memories. It wasn't just about you, though. She'd been struggling, physically and mentally, for a long time. Jason swallowed hard. "I didn't know. I haven't spoken to her since that last visit. I'm very sorry, Thomas. If there's anything I can do for you or Nancy, please let me know." They exchanged a few more words, then ended the call. Jason sat quietly for a moment, reflecting on the life that once was. He looked at Laura, her eyes filled with understanding, and gave her a small, reassuring smile. A few days later, Jason and Laura attended Emma's memorial service. It was a modest gathering, where they offered their condolences to her family. Only Anne, the receptionist from Crosby and Pierce, attended from Emma's former workplace. Months later, Jason received unexpected news. Emma had left him $500,000 in her will. The rest of her estate had gone to her parents and Daniel. Jason and Laura debated long and hard about what to do with the money. Jason worried that keeping it might tether him to memories he'd rather leave in the past. In the end, they decided to keep it. They used the money to set up trust funds for their children's education, ensuring a secure future for Mark, Jason Jr., Sophie, and little Marianne. The remaining balance helped them purchase a spacious new home, filled with light, laughter, and new memories. Over time, thoughts of Emma came and went, sometimes triggered by a song, a familiar place, or an old photo tucked away in a drawer. But those memories no longer held pain. Instead, they served as quiet reminders of the past, woven into the tapestry of a life that had moved on, grown, and flourished. And it was enough.